Did I tell you I love you this morning? Just to remind you, did any of you see the sign out front of the church this morning? That is, if the 16 inches of snow we got over the week wasn't covering up. It says, tell somebody you love them today, which, as you remember, that was your homework assignment last Sunday. I'll be collecting those assignments after class this morning. And the idea, of course, is to put love into action. And this week I was surfing the interwebs and I ran across a videotape that had tried to do so by offering random strangers $5 to telephone somebody on their speakerphone and to tell them that they love them. That's right, they stood on the sidewalk holding up a sign and they asked people to stop. We'll pay you $5 if you telephone somebody and tell them that you love them. And Steve, I think you've got some tape for us to roll about what that looked like.
Call someone and tell them that you love them for $5.
That's all you gotta do? Yeah. You gotta have it on speaker. Gotcha. Hey, I'm just calling to let you know I love you. Nothing happened. I'm just calling you.
You really?
Yeah, I'm good.
What's going on?
Nothing. Just calling to say I love you.
Where are you at?
I'm at school. Nothing. I gotta go to class and I have to take a quiz and then I'm heading back to the house.
You're lying.
I'm not lying.
You're up to something.
No, I promise.
Alright, well, I love you too.
Alright, I love you. Alright, bye.
Good job.
No, keep it up.
Yes, sir.
Bro,
You keep it, bro.
no problem. No, keep it. Give it to the next person. They need it more than I do.
Hey, Mama. Hey, I was just calling to let you know that I love you. You have another day today? Okay, well, I'm gonna let you go. I was just calling to tell you that. Alright, Mama. I'll see you later. Y'all don't gotta give me no money. I'll be safe.
You love that. So they found out what people wanted was not the $5. Did you notice both of them? They gave the money back. No, what people needed was not the $5. What they needed was to be reminded. Because we all know that we don't express our love enough and we don't let those around us know that we care for them as often as we should. The love in our hearts, we often lock up and we're scared to show. At the end of the day, we suspect that this is a good habit to get into, and perhaps there's a way we can do that. And I think that we all know this is a good thing to do. And I think it's because the more we normalize telling people that we care for them, that we love them, the more that we strengthen the bonds that we have with other people, and the more we create a more connected world, a more compassionate world, and a world that is more taken with love and care for each other. And I think that's what Jesus is up to this morning when he calls his disciples to come and follow him. This is what Jesus is up to when he calls you and me to follow him. Our job is to take the love in our hearts and to share it in ways that connect, that reconcile, that heal, and that form our world. And we all know there are forces out there working 180 degrees against that. But that's our job as believers in Jesus Christ to have that love in our hearts. Like the disciples, each one of us, we all have God-given gifts. We have God-given convictions and connections and personalities and resources to contribute to the bettering of our world. And each one of us has fallen prey to one degree or another to a very strong leaning in our culture, thanks most recently to pandemics and to snowstorms. And this leaning is towards apathy. This leaning is towards hopelessness, to negativity, to loneliness, to discouragement. And so we come together as a church, both in person and virtually. And we come into church programmed to undervalue ourselves and to overvalue others. And I think what Jesus and what God are constantly inviting us to do is to look at us and see ourselves as God sees us, which is often very different than how we see ourselves. So this sermon is about challenging you and me to get back into the game, to get back at looking at ourselves the way that God sees us, to look at all the wonderful gifts, all the wonderful resources that we have, that God's given us, and seeing those as outsiders might see it and say, oh, Deborah's got it all together. Deborah says, well, not from my perspective. I think God wants us to see it from God's perspective. To answer the call of Jesus, who's always inviting us to places of hope and positivity and courage, to get more in touch with our purpose, to get excited about who we are, and to be enthusiastic about the work that God has called us to do. That's exactly what Jesus did with Peter this morning in our gospel. We pick up our story this morning. We're in the northern part of the country. We're by the Lake of Gennesaret. If that sounds confusing to you, that's because it goes by many names in the New Testament. It's the Lake of Galilee. It's the Sea of Galilee. And he goes out into a boat, and Jesus performs a miracle that causes Simon Peter to fall at Jesus' knees and to declare his inadequacy. 2 weeks ago, and I see some pilgrims here today, Kathy, you remember standing by that lake of Galilee, and we looked out at that very sea, and we envisioned what it must have looked like for Jesus to command Peter to throw the net on the other side, and then to haul up that abundance of fish. And then, of course, this prompted St. Peter to say this, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." He doesn't yet know who Jesus is, or in his wildest dreams, what Jesus has in store for him. So Jesus responds with compassion. He says to Peter, "Don't be scared." But he also responds with a challenge and with a task. And he uses this very fitting metaphor. For Peter will soon be catching people. What this means is not immediately clear, but it's unpacked in the next 3 years of Jesus' ministry. And this includes making disciples, healing people, caring for people, being charitable for people, to people, loving people, and standing up for the right thing, for justice. The last part, I think, is perhaps the most difficult. Remember, it's what got Jesus killed. It's dangerous, it's inconvenient, it's unsafe, it's unpopular. Standing up for justice means standing up for what we believe in. Maybe you're faced with something like that this morning in your life. Standing up for justice is standing up to what we believe God has shown us to be important. It means staying true to who we are as God's children and to doing what we're called to do. Did anybody this week see that dust up with Joe Rogan? Did you read about that, George? Joe Rogan, he's a really famous podcaster, as you probably know. He's probably the most popular podcaster in the world. He's got 11 million people who listen to him routinely in his very long podcast. You ever listen to that podcast? Nope. You have? I've heard. I've listened. It's on my long list. But Joe mainly talks about Joe. But he's very entertaining. You may have seen him. He's been on TV shows in the past. But he talks about a lot of current events. And one thing he talks a lot about is COVID-19 and vaccinations. He comes under fire recently for disseminating misinformation about the virus and making room on his show for people who discount its effectiveness and the worth of COVID-19 vaccinations. And he reportedly just signed a $100 million deal with the platform that hosts his podcast. It's called Spotify. And while this corporation claims to stand against the dissemination of disinformation, they have yet to do anything to reel in Joe Rogan. And as a result, several podcasters who were on Spotify, including Neil Young, including Joni Mitchell, and where's Mike Sutso? I think Ken Miller, and these people, your recordings, they've all pulled their podcasts from Spotify this week. They realize that this may have little effect on Joe Rogan's behavior, but they say it's something that they have to do out of their moral conscience, standing up to their convictions and making a ruckus on behalf of a cause to which they feel strongly. What is the cause for which you feel strongly this morning? Where is the conviction in our hearts to make a ruckus around the things that matter to you and me? Now, I understand it may not involve a political leaning or taking a moral stand, but it may be about being the best mother you can be, the best grandmother you can be, the best engineer, teacher, or neighbor, or parishioner that we can possibly be. How strongly do we feel called to these vocations? And if we believe God has called us to these vocations, then how seriously are we taking that call? We don't have to be a Hollywood star or recording artist who's famous to be able to be firm in our convictions of, I'm called to be a priest. I'm called to be a musician. I'm called to be a mom, a grandma, name your profession. St. Peter decided to hang up his fishing nets because Jesus called him to do that. The same God who called him into that vocation is calling and has called us to be in ours. Peter decided to follow his heart, follow his deepest conviction, and to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. That's what this sermon is about. Because each one of us has something we've been called to do as well. We each have a job to do. Maybe it's an idea to pursue. Maybe you're sitting on the fence about a business idea. You have a new project you want to launch. Our soul's asking us to stand up and get busy about something. There's a Stoic philosopher named Epictetus who said this: now is the time to get serious about living your ideals. How long can you afford to put off who you really want to be? Your nobler self cannot wait any longer. Put your principles into practice now, he would tell his disciples. Stop the excuses. Stop the procrastination. This is your life. You aren't a child anymore. The sooner you set yourself to your spiritual program, the happier you will be. The longer you wait, the more you'll be vulnerable to mediocrity and feel filled with shame and regret because you know you are capable of better. From this instant on, vow to stop disappointing yourself. Separate yourself from the mob. Decide to be extraordinary. And do what you need to do now. Can I tell you the story of Louis the towel guy? When you and I check in a hotel, we may be delighted if the general manager comes up to us, introduces himself. We may be delighted if the owner comes up to us and introduces himself. It's because these jobs carry prestige. The people who have these jobs have important decisions to make. They command huge budgets. Tons of people rely upon them to feed their families. The general manager, the owner, got a lot of responsibility. They get paid well, and they're highly regarded. Usually, they've risen to the top of their professions. But what about the maids? What about the people who change the sheets and the pillowcases, who launder the soiled linens, and who fold the tips of the bathroom tissue? You ever notice that? Like a little arrow there. What about these folks? The pay for these jobs, the respect garnered by others, and even the responsibilities on a much, much different scale, a much smaller scale, when you compare it to the owners and to the general managers. So we might think that these people would be much less motivated to do a good job. And many of them are. Because when you got a job like this, it's much more difficult to see it as a noble profession or as a divine calling from the Almighty. I'm a maid. That is, if you're not Louis. I met Louis last week. He was the maid who'd been cleaning my guest room for the previous 2 weeks. And I sought out to meet him because Louis was different than any other maid I'd ever known. His job was to clean my room, but he did it in a way that I'll never forget. And I think Steve has some pictures to show us. Because when he came into our room, he didn't treat it like just any other dirty room. Take a look at this bed. Every day, our pilgrims return from their adventures, or out sightseeing, out praying, and out following the footsteps of Jesus. This is how we'd find our rooms. This is how we'd see the towels arranged. Louis was not content simply folding and hanging, folding and hanging, folding and hanging. No, he used his imagination, his energy, his enthusiasm to come up with all kinds of different ways to arrange the towels. As you can see, he made dragons and snakes and scorpions and lobsters. He made imaginative figures, striking humorous poses. He'd find stuff in your room, books and bracelets and hats to create truly unique, playful figures. And there's Louis right there. Yeah, he made our stay absolutely unforgettable. And so, my brothers and sisters, if the maid can take this much pride, can bring this much enthusiasm, can bring this much game to his job, what can we take to ours? This morning we realized that there's no job that's too mundane, that's too obscure. There's no role that you and I are playing that's too small. That Jesus extends his hand to you and me and invites us, like he did St. Peter, to up our game, inviting us to bring all of ourselves to life, to jump in with fervor and enthusiasm, to shun the temptations of apathy and discouragement, and to see every day as an opportunity to shine. May God arise anew in our hearts, friends, so to do. Amen.